Hi, friends. I'm Father Kerry Walters, pastor of Holy Spirit American National Catholic Church, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one on two models of righteousness. In his dialogue entitled Republic, written by the Greek philosopher Plato around 400 years before Jesus was born, the topic under consideration is dikaiosune, righteousness or justice. What Plato wants to do is to try and understand what it means to be a righteous person. And to that end, he has several different characters in his dialogue offer several different perspectives on righteousness. And I think that one of the most interesting of all of those perspectives was given by none other than Glaucon, who was the real-life brother of Plato in Book 2 of the Republic. The reason I think that this particular perspective is so interesting, even though I think it's dead wrong, is because it not only tells a rather charming but frightening mythical story, one that clearly, by the way, inspired J.R.R. Tolkien in the 20th century when he sat down to write his epic Lord of the Rings, but also a perspective that seems to be all too common today in our postmodern society when it comes to reflections about morality. This is what Glaucon says. He offers us the story of the Ring of Gyges. A shepherd is wandering in the hills and he discovers a tomb, and in that tomb he discovers a ring of power, a magic ring, the Ring of Gyges, which has the effect of turning its wearers invisible. What in the world is the shepherd going to do with this incredible power that he suddenly stumbled upon? Will he use it to do good in the world, or will he use it to pursue the full satisfaction of his own appetites and passions? Well, he does the latter. He goes to the capital city, he slays the king, he seduces the queen, and he seizes power. Glaucon, after telling the story, then asks his listeners in the dialogue, and us today, is there really a single human being on the face of the earth who wouldn't do something similar if they discovered a ring of power like this? Is there any person on earth who wouldn't pursue with absolute ferocity her pleasures and passions and appetites if she knew she could do so and get away with it? Glaucon's answer is no. No human being is capable of acting moral except for the fact that there are in place social norms and principles and laws that will punish him or her if passions or appetites are pursued relentlessly. So for Glaucon, morality is nothing more than a social construct that keeps society from falling into chaos with each individual against every other individual in the pursuit of passion and appetite satisfaction. That's all that morality amounts to. Well, to a certain extent, it seems to me that this model that Glaucon presented us almost 25 years ago is one that many people will agree with today. They argue that really there's nothing objectively right or wrong in the world, and that there's really no ultimate self-harm that's done if one pursues one's appetites and pleasures to the max, but that we're prevented from doing so because of the laws of the land and the moral injunctions, all of which are just invented that we may have absorbed in one way or another by growing up in the particular culture in which we grow up. All one needs to do then in order to be quote-unquote moral is to conform to the norms and the laws of the land. Now compare that with what I think is a much, much better model of righteousness, the model found in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which of course is in chapters 5, 6, and 7 of the Gospel of Matthew. Before I go any further, I just might note the rather interesting and to a certain extent disheartening fact that many people, skeptics and Christians alike, consider the moral advice that Jesus gives in the Sermon on the Mount to be undoable. They see it as too harsh, too relentless, too demanding for mere mortals to live up to. And so they kind of dismiss it as an ideal toward which we ought to strain, even though we can never achieve. I think that's dead wrong. I think we ought to take Jesus quite seriously at his word. So, for instance, some of the injunctions that skeptics, whether they're religious or not, typically appeal to when they claim that the Sermon on the Mount's moral advice is undoable would be the following. When Jesus tells us, for example, that we have committed a sin not just if we commit an overt act of adultery, but if we look at another person with lust in our heart, or that we can slay another person physically, true, and that's a bad thing to do, but to have hatred in one's heart for a brother or a sister is already to have committed a horrible sin. Jesus' point is this, unlike Glaucon's point, that in order to be moral, more is necessary than just ostensive or external behavior. There has to be an accompanying interior moral state as well. In other words, a moral person is one who possesses what the Latins would have called integritas, that is, an integrity or a union between outer behavior and inner state. If we are good in our behavior only because we fear being punished if we step out of line, while at the same time harboring inside of ourselves all kinds of harmful and destructive and hateful passions and appetites, we're certainly not moral. We're certainly not righteous in any meaningful sense of the word. And I believe that's what Jesus is trying to convey to us and to invite us to consider as we look at our own lives. But after all, a perfectly wicked person can experience a kind of perverse sort of integritas, can't he or she? I mean, a person can behave in the world wickedly, and the interior passions and appetites that drive that person to act wickedly can be perfectly consistent with the behavior. So something else seems to be required here, more than just integration between the inner and the outer. And Jesus recognizes that as well. If you look at all of his teachings throughout the four Gospels, you'll discover that what Jesus wants to suggest is that our prime intention, our first motive in everything that we do, but especially in actions that have moral weight, is love of God. We act in the way we do if we are righteous out of a love of God. A love of God, not a fear of God, not a fear of the laws of the land, because often love of God can lead us to go in a way contrary to the culture in which we live, yes? No, we act out of a love of God, a desire to please the beloved, a desire to not break the heart of the beloved. And with that kind of interiority that is suffused by love, our external comportment, our external behavior will certainly, according to Jesus, be righteous. Is there a modicum of self-interest involved in that? Well, I suppose there is, because love is an emotion and a way of being that certainly fulfills us, doesn't it? It makes us happy, even in those times which are sometimes cruel and gray and distressing. But the prime motive is not so much self-interest as it is the desire to please the beloved by doing things that we know will please the beloved. Glauconian morality may be the way in which many and perhaps most people in the 21st century think of morality, but it's certainly not the way in which it seems to me a Christian ought to think about morality. When we think about morality, when we think about righteousness, when we think about justice, we think about the integrity between inner and outer, and an integrity that's bonded, that's driven, that's motivated by love of God. I'm Father Kerry Walters, and this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.